Hello, my name is Sarah Miller. I am 55 years old, an age when many people start thinking about a leisurely retirement, perhaps traveling, spending time with their grandchildren, or simply enjoying the fruits of their labor. I had similar plans, dreaming of a peaceful life with my beloved husband, Robert. But life takes unexpected turns. For nearly 30 years of my life, I have stood on the podium, imparting historical knowledge to generations of students at Austin High School, right here in Austin, Texas. I loved that job, loved the excitement of youth, loved the way history connects the past with the present. But 3 years ago, I had to make the most difficult decision of my life, early retirement. Not because I no longer loved my job, but because the man I loved more than life itself, Robert, my husband, my companion of 28 years, was entering the final stages of his battle with cruel lung cancer. My Robert. He was a talented architect, a man with a warm heart and a great sense of humor. He was my whole world. We met when I was a young teacher fresh out of college, and he was an aspiring architect. Our life in Austin was not as lavish and splendid as his family's, but our small house on Lake Travis was always filled with laughter, sharing, and above all, love and respect for each other. It was a real home, where we built memories together brick by brick. But then, 6 months ago, my world collapsed. Robert left me forever. The pain of losing him still aches, cutting into my heart every time I walk into the now strangely empty house. Every corner reminds me of him. His laughter still seems to echo somewhere. I'm trying, day by day, to put this chaotic life back together, to learn to live without him. In that bleak picture, my husband's family, the Petersons, emerged as a complex color. My father-in-law, George Peterson, was a successful real estate businessman, a decisive man, somewhat patriarchal, but fair in his own way. He passed away a year ago after a sudden stroke, leaving behind a considerable fortune. Robert once said that his father respected my career and independence, even though I did not come from the upper class like them. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, was different. She was about 75 years old, and she maintained the elegant, aristocratic appearance of a wealthy lady. But I always sensed a distance, even a little disdain from her. Perhaps it was because I was just a teacher, not a good match for the prestigious Peterson family. She was always proud of her lineage and wealth, and never seemed to fully accept me. My husband, Michael, the eldest son, who took over the business from his father, was ambitious and self-centered. He always felt like he deserved more than he had. His wife, Jennifer, was a shadow of her husband and mother-in-law, always agreeing with them, somewhat vain and prying into the lives of others, especially mine. There was always an invisible tension between me and the Petersons. My poor Robert was often in the middle, trying to make things right. He knew I was uncomfortable, and he always tried to protect me. Perhaps the only person in that family with whom I felt any real connection was my father-in-law, George. Especially in the last months of Robert's life, he would often visit, sitting quietly by his bedside. He saw how devotedly I cared for his son, and I believe he had a certain respect for me. He once said to me, in a low, sad voice, "Sarah, thank you for being there for him. You were the best thing that ever happened to Robert." He also hinted that he would not let me suffer, that he had arranged for me to live well after both he and Robert were gone. A few weeks ago, as I was still grappling with grief and loneliness, I received a phone call from Eleanor. She invited me to dinner at her family's mansion in the posh Westlake Hills neighborhood. Her reason was touching: to bring our family closer together after our recent loss, and added, to also discuss some matters related to George's father's will. To be honest, I was hesitant. I knew their personalities too well. But a small part of me held out hope. Hope that perhaps they really wanted to make amends, to show their concern after Robert's death. And of course, I was curious about my father-in-law's will. George and Robert's previous words had led me to believe that he had some plans for me. Maybe this dinner was a new beginning, a belated recognition? Oh, how naive I had been. The Peterson mansion sat on a hill overlooking the glittering lights of downtown Austin. It was huge, cold, and luxurious, a stark contrast to the small, cozy home Robert and I shared. I walked into the house, forcing a polite smile, though I felt uneasy. The atmosphere at dinner was as I had expected. Tension, poorly disguised by empty pleasantries. Eleanor asked about my health in a tone I suspected was a formality. Michael talked endlessly about new real estate deals, about how his company was doing under his direction. Jennifer bragged endlessly about her plans for an upcoming European trip, emphasizing the luxury of it. I sat there, trying to join in the conversation, but feeling lost and alone. The food was delicious, served on expensive china, but I couldn't swallow. There was a sense of unease in the air. Then, as expected, after some dull small talk, Eleanor changed the subject with a suspiciously natural air. She put down her fork and looked at me with what she tried to pass off as sympathy. "Sarah," she began, her voice soft and artificial. "I know this is a very difficult time for you. Losing Robert was a huge blow to all of us. But you know, life has to go on, and there are things we need to work out. It was George's will." She paused, as if waiting for my reaction. "You know, he loved Robert very much, and he loved you very much." I just nodded slightly. My heart started to beat faster. My intuition told me something was wrong. Michael immediately chimed in, his tone knowing and responsible. "Yes, Sarah. Dad left some money. He was always worried about everyone's future. But you know," he shrugged, "the economy hasn't been as good as it seems in recent years. The company needs a lot of capital to reinvest, to maintain its position. Maybe when he made his will, he didn't anticipate all these changes." "What do you mean, Michael?" I asked bluntly, a feeling of unease rising in my stomach. What were they beating around the bush about? Eleanor quickly took over for her son, her voice still sweet but with a hint of urgency. "What Michael means is, sometimes the legal procedures of inheritance are complicated, Sarah. There are taxes, regulations that can make things unnecessarily complicated. We just want to find the best, simplest way for everyone, especially for you, while you are grieving." My mind was spinning. Simplify? Complicate? Or were they talking about changing something? My throat felt dry. "I don't understand." I tried to keep my voice even. "What does George's father's will say?" "Oh, don't worry, Sarah," Jennifer interjected with what I thought was a fake smile. "Everything will be fine. Mom-in-law and Michael will take care of everything." I couldn't take it anymore. The atmosphere in the dining room was tense. "Excuse me." I stood up, trying to keep my face calm. "May I excuse myself to go to the bathroom for a moment?" Eleanor nodded, the smile still on her lips. "Of course, dear." I walked quickly out of the dining room, my heart pounding in my chest. The hallway was long and quiet, leading to the living area and the other rooms. I found the guest bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and tried to calm my rapid breathing. Something fishy was going on. They were hiding something from me. On my way back to the dining room, I passed George's old study. The heavy wooden door was ajar, a slit of light spilling out into the dark hallway. And then I heard voices, Eleanor's, Michael's, and Jennifer's voices. They were talking, perhaps thinking I was waiting in the car or in some room farther away. Curiosity and foreboding made me stop and listen, holding my breath. Eleanor's voice rang out, no longer fake sweetness from before, but cold and calculating. "Hurry up, Michael. Lawyer Chen said, as long as Sarah signs this codicil, everything will be over. Just tell her that she signed it to simplify some complicated tax procedures to make it faster." Michael's voice was then full of smugness and greed. "I know, Mom. $50,000 is more than enough for her. What more does she need? Most of Dad's assets, the house on Lake Travis that Robert loves so much, all that valuable stock, it all belongs to us, the Petersons. Dad is so old and soft-hearted that it's unnecessary. With Robert dead, she has nothing to do with this family anymore." Then Jennifer's sour voice. "That's right, honey. She's just a retired teacher. How can she deserve all that wealth? We're the real Petersons, the rightful heirs." "Shut up, Jennifer." Eleanor's voice was sharp. "Don't talk nonsense. Just stick to the plan. Wait until after dessert and get her the papers to sign. She's grieving over Robert. Her mind is in turmoil. She won't think much of it. Sign it quickly and send her home." My ears were ringing. My heart stopped for a moment, then started pounding again as if it was about to burst out of my chest. A cold feeling ran down my spine. Betrayal. Naked, cruel, and unexpectedly bitter. The pain of losing Robert had not yet subsided, and now this terrible shock had come upon me. This was not simply a matter of money and property. This was a blatant denial of the 28 years I had been a daughter-in-law in this family. This was a disregard for the deep love between me and Robert. And most cruelly, this was a blatant insult to the will of my father-in-law, whom I had once respected. They were plotting to deceive me, to take advantage of my pain, to take what was rightfully mine, what Mr. George wanted to give me as a reward, a guarantee for the future. Tears threatened to spill over, but I forced them back. My hands were shaking, but I clenched them. I couldn't let them know I'd heard. I backed away slowly, turning around and taking a deep breath, trying to steady my breathing. My face must have been pale, but I forced a smile. I had to get back to the table, pretend nothing had happened. For now, at least. The storm was raging inside, but on the outside, I had to maintain my last semblance of calm. I don't remember what I said for the rest of dinner. I probably just nodded silently, or answered questions mechanically. Dessert arrived, a delicious-looking chocolate mousse, but I just stared at it, my stomach churning. As they had planned, after coffee was served, Michael cleared his throat and pulled a stack of papers from the briefcase next to his chair. "Oh, Sarah," he said, trying to sound friendly. "Here are some papers related to Dad's will that Mom mentioned. Just a formality. Sign here so Attorney Chen can move forward quickly and get this all settled." He slid the papers toward me along with a pen. I looked at the papers, at the expectant faces of Michael, Eleanor, and Jennifer. There was a certain tension in their eyes, though they tried to hide it. Their words echoed in my head. $50,000 is more than enough for her. Robert is dead. She's nothing. I feel a little tired," I said, my voice hoarse. "Can I take it home and take a closer look? My mind isn't very clear right now." Michael and Eleanor looked at each other for a moment. There was undisguised disappointment in their eyes. Eleanor said, her voice still soft, "Oh, of course, dear, if you feel it's necessary. But really, it's just standard procedure, nothing complicated." "Yes, I know," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. "But I want to read it carefully. Thanks for dinner." I stood up, took the papers without looking at them, feeling like I was holding a poisonous snake. I greeted them hastily and almost ran out of that cold mansion. I sat behind the wheel and drove home in a daze. The Austin darkness enveloped the car, but my mind was clearer than ever. Their cruel words and cruel plans played over and over in my head like a scratchy tape. Disgust and anger swirled in my chest. When I got back to the house on Lake Travis, where Robert and I had once lived, silence fell over me. I sank into Robert's familiar armchair, staring at our wedding photo on the mantelpiece, two faces beaming with happiness, full of hope for the future. The tears I had been holding back all evening finally burst forth. I cried. I cried for Robert. I cried for our love, crushed. I cried for the cruel betrayal by the people I had called family. I cried for my own stupidity in ever having a glimmer of hope for them. In that long, lonely night, memories flooded back, mixed with angry and painful thoughts. I remembered the early days of Robert and I's relationship, his awkwardness when he first introduced me to his family. Eleanor had looked me over with a questioning gaze. Michael had asked me about my teacher's salary with a curious, unfriendly look. Only George had shaken my hand firmly, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "Welcome to the family, Sarah." Our wedding was simple and intimate, not the lavish Petersons had wanted, but that's what we wanted. Over the years, Robert was my rock. He stood up for me when Eleanor made insinuations about my lack of style, or when Jennifer made sarcastic comments about my low-paying job. "Mom, Sarah's a good teacher. She's doing meaningful work," Robert would say. And I love her. I recall Robert's last days. I quit my job to take care of him wholeheartedly. The sleepless nights by his bedside, the times taking him to chemotherapy, watching him suffer and wither away day by day. I was exhausted both physically and mentally, but I never regretted it for a moment. I did everything out of love for him. I never thought about property or inheritance. And I remembered the times George came to visit. He didn't say much, just sat there, quietly looking at his son, sometimes holding my hand. Once, when we were alone in the room, he whispered, "Sarah, I know you've worked hard. You deserve to live well after all these sacrifices. I've made sure of that. I don't want you to have to worry about money after Robert and I are gone." Those words, along with the sincerity in his eyes at that time, made me believe that he meant well. Putting it all together now, I saw the red flags I had missed before. The Petersons' delay in releasing the details of George's will after his death. Eleanor's strange eagerness to invite me to dinner. Michael's vague comments about the financial situation. It was all part of a carefully calculated plan. They waited, waiting for my grief to subside a little, but still long enough for me to let my guard down, and then tricked me into signing some document that would take away George's inheritance. What was this so-called codicil they were talking about? Was it legitimate? Or was it a complete forgery? What did George's original will actually say? How much did he leave me? The house? The stocks? The cash? The questions swirled in my mind, accompanied by growing anger. The next morning, I woke up with puffy eyes but a steely resolve. The grief was still there, but now it was covered with a frost of anger and a will to get justice. They would not get away with it. I would not let them trample on Robert's memory and my father-in-law's will. The first thing I did was to put away the papers Michael had given me. I wasn't going to sign anything until I knew the truth. Next, I turned on my computer and started researching. I read about Texas inheritance law, learning about concepts like valid wills, undue influence, and whether Eleanor and Michael had pressured George when he made his will. Or were they trying to commit inheritance fraud by making a forged or altered will? I also learned about executors and their powers. During the conversation I overheard, Eleanor mentioned a lawyer, David Chen. I remembered the name. Mr. Chen was the Petersons' longtime corporate lawyer who had handled many of their legal matters. Robert had said that his father trusted Mr. Chen with business matters, but he was not sure about personal matters. My instincts told me that Mr. Chen might have been bribed or pressured by the Petersons to cooperate in this scheme. I looked up the number for Mr. Chen's law firm and called. After a few transfers, I was connected to his secretary. I introduced myself as Sarah Miller, the wife of the late Robert Peterson, and said I wanted to ask about the progress of Mr. George Peterson's will. The secretary replied politely but vaguely, "Oh, hello, Mrs. Miller. Sorry for your loss. Regarding Mr. Peterson's will, Mr. Chen is handling everything in due course. When we have specific information to share, we will contact you." "Can I speak directly to Attorney Chen?" I asked. "Sorry, Attorney Chen is very busy right now. Would you like to leave a message?" This evasive attitude only reinforced my suspicions. They clearly did not want me to have direct access to the information. Next, I mustered up the courage to call Michael. I tried to keep my voice casual, pretending to know nothing about their scheme. "Hi, Michael, this is Sarah. I'm calling to ask about the paperwork you gave me last night. I looked it over but honestly didn't understand it very well. Could you explain more about this so-called codiciled will?" There was silence on the other end of the line for a moment. Then Michael answered, his voice a little strained. "Oh, Sarah, it's not really that complicated. Like I said, it's just some paperwork to get things done faster. You don't have to worry about it. Just sign it and send it back to Attorney Chen. He'll take care of the rest." "But what does it change from Dad's original will?" I asked bluntly. Uh, it's just a little adjustment to the current financial situation of the company and the family," Michael stammered. "It's really no big deal, trust me. Dad would definitely want things to go smoothly." The evasive tone and lack of conviction in Michael's explanation only confirmed that they were lying to me. They did not want to simplify the process, but wanted to completely change the content of the will in their favor. After those useless phone calls, I felt a terrible loneliness. Robert was no longer there to protect me. My father-in-law, who might have been on my side, was gone. I was alone, facing a rich, powerful, and cunning family. They had money, their own lawyers, their connections. What did I have? A broken heart and an empty house. But in that moment of despair, the image of Robert flashed through my mind. What would he want me to do? He would never accept this injustice. He would fight for what was right. And the image of George, with his promise of my future, gave me strength. I could not let them win. I could not let their greed destroy everything. The pain and anger slowly transformed into a cold, iron determination. I had to find the truth. I had to find the original will. I had to reclaim what was mine, not just for money, but for honor, for love, and for justice. I would not back down from this fight. The next few days were filled with tension and endless searching. I went through every drawer, every box of Robert's old things, hoping to find some clue, a letter, a note, anything related to his father's will. But it seemed hopeless. One weekend afternoon, while cleaning out Robert's small study at home, which had actually been George's study when he visited and worked at our house, and which Robert had inherited after his father's death, I decided to sort through the stacks of old architectural drawings and documents that had belonged to both of them. The desk was a heavy, antique oak desk that George had loved and had left to Robert. It had many small drawers. While cleaning under the table, my hand accidentally touched a strange ledge on the inside of one of the table legs. Curious, I bent down to take a closer look. It was a small lever, almost hidden in the wood grain. I tried pushing it gently. There was a soft click sound, and a section of the table leg panel popped open, revealing a long, narrow secret drawer that I had never known existed. My heart pounded. Could this be what I was looking for? Trembling, I pulled the drawer open. There wasn't much inside, just a few oddments, an old fountain pen that had run out of ink, a few rusty paper clips, a small technical notebook of George's that I'd seen before. I was about to close the drawer in frustration when something bulged under the notebook. I took out the notebook. And there, neatly placed at the bottom of the drawer, was a large, thick, ivory-white envelope that looked fairly new. What was special about it was that it was carefully sealed with a dark red wax seal, the kind that George used. On the front of the envelope, in George's familiar, strong handwriting, it was clearly written, "To Robert, open only when absolutely necessary." My breath caught. This was it. This had to be it. When absolutely necessary. When more so? Robert was gone, but I knew he would want me to open it. My hands shook as I carefully peeled back the wax seal. Inside were several neatly folded sheets of paper. The top sheet was a handwritten letter, written on personal stationery with the name George Peterson printed at the top. His handwriting was strong, though a little shaky in places, suggesting it had been written at a time when his health was failing, perhaps a few months before his stroke. I took a deep breath and began to read. "My dear son Robert," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means either I am no longer in this world, or there is some important reason why you have come to me. I hope it is the former, even if it means I have to leave you." My eyes started to water, but I tried to keep reading. "I write these words not only to express my boundless love and pride for you, but also to clarify some important matters regarding the future, especially Sarah's future. My heart clenched when I read my name. You know, I've always held Sarah in high regard. She's a strong, independent, and kind woman. Most importantly, she loves you with all her heart and has been a pillar of strength for you, especially during your most difficult times. I owe her a debt of gratitude, and I want to make sure she's well taken care of after we're both gone. So, in the formal will that I had carefully drawn up and notarized, I decided to leave Sarah full ownership of the house on Lake Travis that you two live in. It's still legally in my name, you know. In addition, I left her a significant portion of Peterson Holdings stock, 30% of the total stock to be exact, and a cash sum of $500,000. I believe Sarah deserves these things after all she's been through and sacrificed. I also trust her ability to manage this portion of her estate wisely. I almost held my breath when I read those numbers. The house, 30% of the company's stock, $500,000. This was the truth. This was George's true will. The $50,000 that Michael mentioned was a mere fraction, an insulting alms compared to what George had generously given me. But the most important part of the letter is in the next paragraph, which explains the line, "open only when absolutely necessary." However, I must confess something that troubles me, Robert. It is your mother and your brother, Michael. I love them, but I also know their natures better than anyone. Greed and jealousy can blind people. I fear that after I am gone, they will try to change the will or find a way to take away the portion of the estate that I wanted for Sarah. Because of this concern, he continued, his handwriting becoming more determined, I took a precaution. I sent a copy of the original will, fully notarized, along with a recording of my specific instructions for the distribution of this estate to someone I trust implicitly, not the firm's attorney, David Chen, but my personal attorney for many years, a very intelligent and trustworthy woman, Elizabeth Harding. Her office is also in Austin. I have given Mrs. Harding strict instructions that she is only allowed to release these documents or take action if any irregularities arise regarding the execution of my will after my death, or if you, or Sarah, in case you are no longer around, contact me and ask for help. If you're reading this, Robert, it means my hunch was right. Something has happened. Contact Elizabeth Harding immediately. I've attached her address and phone number to this letter. Tell her everything. Don't trust David Chen in this matter. I suspect that Chen can be easily influenced by your mother and Michael. Attached to the letter was indeed a business card for a law firm called Harding & Associates, with the name Elizabeth Harding, attorney at law, and an Austin address and telephone number. I sat there silently, the letter in my hand shaking. This was not just a letter. This was my weapon. This was undeniable proof. Mr. George was not only generous, he was also extremely wise and far-sighted. He had foreseen the greed of his own wife and son and had secretly prepared a backup plan to protect his will, to protect me. A feeling of immense relief and gratitude for George washed over me, dispelling some of the loneliness and fear. Tears streamed down my cheeks again, but this time they were tears of gratitude and hope. I was no longer alone in this fight. I had George on my side, even though he was gone, and I had my attorney Elizabeth Harding. Faith and strength are stronger than ever. The Peterson plot will not succeed. I will contact Mrs. Harding immediately. Justice is near. The very next morning, I called the number on Elizabeth Harding's business card. The voice on the other end was professional and calm. I introduced myself and said that I was calling on the recommendation of a personal letter from the late George Peterson. There was a brief pause before the woman answered, her voice warmer. Hello, Mrs. Miller. This is Elizabeth Harding. Yes, Mr. Peterson has told me in advance. I am sorry about his passing and recently that of your husband, Robert. Please come to my office as soon as possible. We need to talk. The meeting took place that afternoon at Ms. Harding's law office, an elegant, professional but not cold space in downtown Austin. Ms. Harding was about my age, maybe a few years older, with short, neatly cropped gray hair and a sharp, intelligent but sympathetic gaze. She invited me to sit down, poured me a cup of tea, and listened as I recounted the whole story, from the fateful dinner, the words I had overheard, the evasions of attorneys Chen and Michael, to my finding the letter and sealed envelope in the secret drawer. I showed her Mr. George's letter. Mrs. Harding read the letter carefully, nodding when she reached the part where her name was mentioned. When I finished, she looked at me, her eyes determined. "Mrs. Miller, what you have described matches exactly the concerns that Mr. George shared with me before he died. He was very worried that his wishes might be distorted." She stood up, walked over to a sturdy steel filing cabinet, unlocked it, and pulled out a thick, carefully bound binder and a small tape recorder. "Here," she said, placing them on the table in front of me. "This is a certified copy of the original will that George signed on March 15th of last year, just a few months before his stroke, and here's the tape he made that same day." Mrs. Harding switched on the tape recorder. George's deep, familiar voice came through, clear and articulate. He stated the date of the recording, confirmed his identity and his sanity. He then recited the most important provisions of the will, emphasizing the portion of his estate he wanted to leave to me. The house, 30% of the stock, $500,000, and explained his reasons for doing so, reiterating his gratitude and trust in me. He also made it clear that this would be his final will and superseded all previous drafts. Finally, he reiterated his concerns for Eleanor and Michael, and stated that Elizabeth Harding was the person he would trust to protect the will if necessary. Hearing Mr. George's voice again, I couldn't hold back my tears. After turning off the tape recorder, Mrs. Harding reviewed the original copy of the will with me. Every provision was clear, exactly as George had written it in the letter and said it on the tape. There was no such thing as a codicil. Clearly, what Michael had me sign was a document intended to make me renounce my legal rights, either a disclaimer or some fake will for a paltry $50,000. "We now have irrefutable evidence of George's true intentions," Harding said. "We have a number of legal options. We can file a lawsuit in probate court to have this original will recognized as the only valid will, and to allege fraud and undue influence by Eleanor and Michael Peterson. We can also investigate the role of attorney David Chen in this matter. If there is evidence of his intentional complicity, he could face serious professional and even legal consequences." She paused, looking at me questioningly. "However, litigation would be lengthy, costly, and unnecessarily conspicuous. I recommend a different, more immediate, and more effective strategy." "What is it?" I asked, completely trusting her judgment. "We will call an emergency meeting," Mrs. Harding said confidently. "A formal meeting here in this office, with you, me, Eleanor, Michael, Jennifer if they want to, and importantly, David Chen. We will confront them directly, present the evidence we have. We will not threaten legal action right away, but show them that we are aware of their scheme and that we have the truth. The goal is to force them to immediately recognize the legitimacy of this original will and agree to let me oversee the execution of the will in accordance with George's wishes. Faced with the evidence and the risk of public exposure, I believe they will have no choice but to accept." I thought about Mrs. Harding's suggestion. Confronting them directly again made me a little nervous, but the idea of forcing them to admit the truth and fail right in front of me was a powerful feeling. "I agree," I said, my voice firm. "Let's do it." Mrs. Harding immediately drafted a formal but firmly worded legal letter, requesting an emergency meeting within the next 48 hours. The letter stated that I, Sarah Miller, through my attorney, Elizabeth Harding, had become aware of efforts to alter or misrepresent the will of Mr. George Peterson, and that we were in possession of irrefutable evidence of his true and final wishes. The letter was sent by registered mail with return delivery to Eleanor, Michael, and attorney Chen. While waiting for a response, I braced myself for the coming confrontation. I reread George's letter several times, listened to the recording of his voice. I looked at Robert's photo. I was no longer the weak, sad, and scared woman I had been a few days before. I was Sarah Miller, Robert's beloved wife, George's trusted daughter-in-law. I would not let them intimidate me. I was ready. As expected, just a few hours after receiving the letter, Mrs. Harding's office received a call from Attorney Chen, confirming that the meeting would take place the following afternoon at Mrs. Harding's office. His voice on the phone sounded a little tense. That afternoon, I arrived at Mrs. Harding's office a little early. She greeted me with a firm nod. "Ready, Sarah?" she asked. "Ready," I replied, trying to keep my voice from shaking. At the appointed time, Eleanor, Michael, and Jennifer entered the conference room. Eleanor kept her usual cool, arrogant expression, trying to appear calm. Michael looked a little nervous, glancing at me and then at Mrs. Harding. Jennifer walked closely behind her mother-in-law, her head bowed, avoiding my gaze. Last was Attorney David Chen, a middle-aged man with a clearly worried expression, the briefcase in his hands looking heavy. Mrs. Harding invited them to sit at the table across from her and me. The atmosphere in the conference room became thick and tense to the point of being cut. Mrs. Harding wasted no time in pleasantries. She got straight to the point. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice clear and professional. "We are here today to clarify a matter of utmost importance, the execution of the will of the late George Peterson. My client, Mrs. Sarah Miller, has reason to believe that there are efforts to misrepresent or even replace George's last wishes." Michael was the first to speak up, trying to sound indignant. "Attorney Harding, I don't understand what you're talking about. We, the Peterson family, are simply trying to honor my father's wishes and simplify the complicated process for Sarah during this difficult time. There is absolutely no misrepresentation." Eleanor nodded in agreement, her voice as sharp as a knife. "That's right. We consulted with Attorney Chen very carefully. Everything was done completely legally. The so-called codicil we mentioned to Sarah was just a document aimed at streamlining administrative procedures, completely in line with the current financial situation of the family and the company." She glanced at me condescendingly. Perhaps Sarah was too sad and misunderstood our good intentions. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to contain my boiling anger. Misunderstanding? Good intentions? Mrs. Harding remained remarkably calm. She slowly took George's handwritten letter from her file and placed a copy on the table in front of Eleanor and Michael. "Mrs. Peterson, Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice even but authoritative. "Perhaps this handwritten letter, written by George himself before he died, will help clarify his true good intentions and wishes." Eleanor and Michael stared at the copy of the letter in silence. I could see Eleanor's face pale and Michael's mouth gape. Jennifer shrank back in her chair. Mrs. Harding continued, not giving them time to gather their wits. "This letter not only expresses Mr. George's feelings for his daughter-in-law, but also makes clear his concerns for you two. He fears your greed." Mrs. Harding paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. Then she placed the tape recorder and the original will on the table. "And just to be sure, we also have in our possession a recording of George's specific instructions for the distribution of his estate, made the same day he signed this original will." She slid the copy of the will toward them. "This is George Peterson's only valid and authentic will, duly executed and notarized, leaving Sarah Miller her home on Lake Travis, 30% of Peterson Holdings, and $500,000 in cash. An original copy of this will, along with the recording, was secretly entrusted to me by George, because he had foreseen this eventuality." Silence fell over the room. This time, the silence was one of utter shock. Eleanor's face was as white as a sheet of paper, her eyes staring at the documents on the table in disbelief. Michael stuttered, trying to say something but couldn't form a word. He looked at Attorney Chen for help, but Mr. Chen only bowed his head, avoiding everyone's eyes. It was clear that he knew he had assisted in a failed plot and was now facing the consequences. "Attorney Chen," Mrs. Harding turned to him, her voice cold. "It appears that your client has not provided you with sufficient information about the original will in my custody. Or worse, perhaps you knew and still deliberately advised or drafted documents that were intended to violate the legal wishes of Mr. George Peterson? Either way, your position in this matter is very troubling. Lawyer Chen swallowed hard, not daring to reply. Michael tried to get up one last time. This is absurd. My father couldn't— Mr. Peterson, Mrs. Harding interrupted firmly. We have irrefutable evidence, handwritten letters, notarized original wills, tape recordings. Any attempt to deny this will only make your situation worse. You are facing a lawsuit for inheritance fraud, not to mention the other legal consequences, and irreparable damage to your reputation if this becomes public. Eleanor raised her head now, looking at me and Mrs. Harding with eyes filled with anger and helplessness. But she knew they had lost. The plot was completely exposed. There was no way to deny or turn the situation around. Mrs. Harding placed a brief document on the table. Here are the minutes of today's meeting. It is to confirm that all parties present agree to accept as the sole legal document the original will executed by Mr. George Peterson on March 15th of last year, a copy of which is on file in this office. It also states that you agree to have me, Elizabeth Harding, supervise the entire execution of this will to ensure that everything is carried out in accordance with the deceased's wishes. Please sign. Left with no other choice, Eleanor and Michael signed the document with trembling hands. Lawyer Chen also hurriedly signed, perhaps to show his final cooperation to save what little honor remained in his profession. As they left the office, no one said a word to each other. Eleanor didn't look at me. Michael avoided my eyes. I sat there, watching them disappear. A sense of relief and triumph spread through me. Justice had been served. After that tense meeting, things moved quickly under the watchful eye of Elizabeth Harding. George Peterson's original will was officially recognized and executed. Any attempts to delay or cause trouble by Eleanor and Michael were effectively blocked by Mrs. Harding. As per George's wishes, I was given full ownership of the house on Lake Travis, which was filled with wonderful memories between Robert and me. I also transferred 30% of Peterson Holdings stock to my account, along with $500,000 in cash. I was financially secure as my father-in-law had wished. My relationship with my husband's family, which had long been strained, was now completely broken. I no longer wanted anything to do with those people. I cut off all contact. Occasionally, I heard from some old acquaintances that the Peterson family's reputation in the Austin upper class had been greatly affected by the incident. Perhaps someone had accidentally leaked the story of their greed and failed plot. That was the price they had to pay for their treachery and cruelty. Attorney David Chen also lost quite a few clients and reputation after this scandal. For me, this victory is not only about material things. More important than money and property, I have regained justice for myself, protected my honor and love for Robert, and at the same time fully implemented Mr. George's kindness and fairness. That is what makes me feel most at peace. I decided to keep the lake house. It was more than just an asset, it was my home, a place that held the most precious memories of my life. I used some of the inheritance to renovate the house a bit to my liking, to make it my own space, a peaceful place to heal my wounds. The rest, I invested safely with the advice of a reputable financial advisor that Mrs. Harding recommended. I no longer had to worry about money. My life gradually turned a new page. The pain of losing Robert was still there, burning in my heart, but it no longer overwhelmed me like it had before. I began to find simple joys again, tending the small garden in the backyard, reading my favorite history books, joining the local history club, and occasionally rewarding myself with short trips to places I had never been before. The recent incident, although painful, has also made me stronger, more independent, and more appreciative of what I have. I have learned that sometimes it is in the darkest adversity that we find our inner strength. A year or two later, my life in Austin is now truly peaceful. I still live alone in the lake house, but I no longer feel lonely. I have new friends, new interests. Sometimes, when I look out at the lake sparkling in the sunlight, I smile, silently thanking Robert and Mr. George for giving me the opportunity to continue living a meaningful and free life on my own terms. I have found peace after the storm. Sometimes the people you think are closest to you can cause the deepest pain. Have you ever had to stand up for what is right, for the truth, even when it meant confronting your own family members? What helped you find the strength to overcome those challenges? Share your story.